All right, what's going on, guys? So today I'm doing a video that was a request for my man Kanan. I'm sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce your name, bro, but I really appreciate your support. You always leave really positive comments and like all my videos. And I don't have a ton of free time to do this, so the positive feedback really means a lot to me. So you had asked if I could do a video on eccentric, concentric, and isometric contractions, I believe it was. And I was thinking this isn't really something that I knew how to handle because that seems kind of like beginner level. And I tried to address more intermediate to advanced level topics, but I started thinking about it and it's like, sometimes there's a lot of value in taking a more nuanced perspective and peeling back the layers on something that might otherwise seem like a pretty basic concept. So what I want to do is kind of dive into these different types of contractions and different ways to apply them that might be a little bit unique to you. So I'm trying to put my own spin on this and make it a little bit more interesting. So first I want to talk about isometric contractions. Okay, isometrics are awesome and totally underrated. They're really versatile. You can do a lot of different things with isometrics. They're really good for injury rehab. If you have any kind of like strain or pull or something you're recovering from, doing some really low level isometric can really help heal you a little bit faster. They're really good for creating joint space and actually giving you a big increase in your joint range of motion. They can really help increase the integrity of your connective tissue. There's a ton of benefits. They also can help with muscle growth as well. So they often get overlooked in the bodybuilding context. So here are some of my favorite ways to really implement them. We're gonna start with kind of the lowest level isometric. And I know you said you had some back issues, Kenan, so whatever. These are some things you could try that are really low level inputs and you can progress these as you feel a little bit better. So part of the reason why a lot of people have back pain is because their back is just stuck in extension. They don't really have a lot of tolerance for flexion. So this is an easy way to try to introduce some of that back. And if you can't get all the way down on the ground, you can regress this as much as you need, but you're just gonna get as much flexion as you can globally, the whole back. And then from that position, you're going to try to go into extension. So I'm trying to straighten my back and I'm gonna try to go into an arched position, but I'm blocking myself so I can't get out of that flexion. So basically all I'm doing is I'm working these back extensors, but they're from a stretch position. So I'm getting them to work in a lengthened tension position when they're used to just being really shortened. So that's a really easy way to introduce some of that. That's usually what I recommend, to start with something like that. And then you can progress it. Another great way to get a little more of the lumbar spine is to set up a reverse hyperextension. And depending on the type of reverse hyper it is, you might need to put a lot of weight on it or put a band around it so you don't actually move it at all. But you just build up really low level isometric force against it. So I'm trying to lift it, but it's not gonna go. I'm not using a whole lot of force. Again, this is pretty low level. These would be like if I'm recovering from some sort of a back strain. I'm just gonna really gradually start with like 5% and bring that up to like 10 to 20% tops effort if I'm dealing with some kind of issue. This is another cool version. This is a little bit progressed just because we add a little bit of rotation to it. So a lot of times we need to train these tissues in non-linear fashions. And so this is a really good example of how to do that, because this can be pretty hard to load concentrically or eccentrically. So doing this isometrically is a really good way to introduce this kind of awkward loading pattern, which is important because we don't move in straight lines in life. And you'll notice that a lot of times one of these sides is like way harder, and so you can pay a little more attention to that. And so again, if you're recovering from injury or you're sensitive, use real low level intensity, but you can definitely ramp these up if you feel good with it. So those were pretty low level isometrics. Pretty high level isometric is something that is called Pales-Rails in FRC terms. All this really is you're gonna go to an in-range joint range of motion, and you're going to apply isometric force with those tissues in that lengthened position. And you want to ramp up slow as you do this, but you do want to get to like a full intensity if we're trying to actually create more joint space. So here's an example of me doing this. So here's a setup for tibia internal rotation where I'm trying to gain some joint space. So I'm blocking my foot so I can really make sure I stay in place, and I'm rotating this foot, this tibia, externally as hard as I can against that kettlebell while it's in that lengthened position. And then at the end of about 2 minutes, you're gonna reverse that and you're gonna shorten the regressive tissues. Now, when you do that, you don't need to like ramp up. You can go straight from 0 to 100. So after I get done pushing against it, I'm gonna turn it the other way as much as I can, as hard as I can. Same thing on here. I'm pressing down as hard as I can. This is at the end of a 2-minute stretch. Max effort down. I'm gonna ramp up to 100% to get to max effort, and then I'm gonna try to lift it up with max effort. And it shouldn't really move if you're at real true in range. And this is a really effective way to increase your range of motion, and it can be applied to like global areas, like you can do like a whole pec stretch, or you can do really joint specific just for internal rotation, something like that. And this is a setup I use all the time. So if you're trying to create space, like I actually want to get more external rotation, I would hold this setup for about 2 minutes. Now, if I'm just trying to prime the capsular tissues and really kind of get a little bit of post-activation potentiation, I don't need to go for about 2 minutes. I'm not going to gain a lot of range of motion, but if I have adequate range, that's fine. So what I can do here is I'm just going to apply as much force as I can in that direction as I'm blocked. I'm going to build up to max effort, and then same thing, I'm just going to reverse it, no build up, just right into max effort. That's a good way to prime these capsular tissues to help you lift a little bit more effectively. And just one more example of how to use isometrics for pels rails. This would be for hip internal rotation. Same concept. I'm going to press down against the stick for my pels contraction at the end of the stretch, and then I'm going to lift it up and try to go max effort once I get done with that. So really effective way to increase range of motion is doing these pels rails isometric contractions. Here's a different kind of isometric that is really good at just really increasing your in-range loading capacity and your connective tissue capacity. So here I'm at in-range external rotation, but I'm changing up the way it's expressed a little bit. And I'm just trying to stay at that in-range the whole time. So as I change, it might drop a little bit, but I'm trying to really hold tension at that in range. I'm not just holding slack on connective tissue and just kind of resting and making sure the right tissues are supporting that. So this is a little more of a dynamic isometric. And these are all really good for mobility. This is the main purpose of these ones so far. I think this is another kind of similar example. I'm going to hold an in range of internal rotation while I'm just changing the way that's expressed by moving around, changing my rib position, changing my sternum position. So isometrics are really good at creating joint space. They're also really good at just getting your body to kind of reset and chill out. So a lot of times if you're in a position that's difficult to maintain, you feel like you're getting a little wonky, if you can kind of just hold that and take some solid breaths for a few seconds, you can kind of get your system to reset and handle that a little bit better. So one of the best ways to reset your pelvis is to just do this basic 90-90 on the wall. And this is an isometric hold where I'm barely lifting up my butt just a tiny bit, and I'm focusing on breathing and getting my ribs to drop and my pelvis to stay neutral as I inhale. So just holding this isometrically can really bring my pelvis and my rib cage together, which is going to help me perform a lot better during the actual workout. Another kind of move I do a lot that's just an isometric hold is like on a pec fly. Maybe I'm on the cable. I'll get to the in range, and then I'll exhale, let those ribs come down, make sure my scapula kind of comes off my back a little bit. Inhale from there, and you can really feel that loosening up a lot of things, and it's a good way to just get more comfortable at an in-range position. All right, so here's another example of me using isometric just to kind of get a reset in my pelvis and rib cage positioning. And on this, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get my rib cage to shift to the left, okay? So I'm in a little bit of a, what you call a BC pattern, if you're familiar with PRI. That just means that my right side of my ribs are a little bit more internally rotated, my left is more flared. That makes my sternum kind of turn to the right. I need to get it to go left, and that'll give me better external rotation measurements on my left side and better internal rotation measurements on my right side. So just an easy isometric side plank where I'm holding and breathing, making sure the right shoulder blade is squeezed back. And in PRI, we do a lot of isometric holds where we're breathing to get everything to kind of fall into the position that we'd like. So here's another quick example of that. And again, I'm just holding and making sure I can breathe in this very specific position. So isometrics are great at getting your body to get out of compensation patterns. And these are all what you call PRI integrated moves. Sometimes I'll do these if I'm feeling a little bit off, or I'll do them before I do like a heavy deadlift or squat or something. Isometrics are really good for building connective tissue capacity. And so this is something that is often overlooked. Bodybuilders just think about their muscle tissue. They never think about their connective tissue, even though that's what really transfers force. And that's also what allows their muscles to grow and expand and express themselves. So you have to have the connective tissue to be the scaffolding for that. This is something that me and John Quint from Westside Barbell talk about. If you haven't checked out that podcast I did with him, make sure to give it a view. So one way that we use isometrics to improve connective tissue load-bearing capacity is to use what's called slingshot catches, okay? So here's an example of what that looks like. So you're just holding that in range and catching that tension. Here's another example I'm using for my hip internal rotation. Another similar move is a chaos catch. And this, you're using the perturbations that come from the elastic band to really strengthen that connective tissue. So I do this for internal rotation of my shoulders a lot. This is a good example of how you can set that up for like a sleeper hold position. And this is something that you can really feel the improvements on. Whenever I first started integrating connective tissue training, I was so tight. like doing these advanced movements didn't feel that good. I couldn't really do a ton of them, but now I build up to them and I can just feel everything moving so much better. I get no pain or tightness when I do it now. There's also different kinds of isometrics, like positional isometrics, that you might use for something sport specific, or if you really need to train a specific line of tissues. There's lengthened ballistic isometrics. This is something that me and John Quint talked about as well. And a lot of times I'll do this for the bicep. After I get a big pump, I'll like get it lengthened, especially if they have that machine where you keep your elbow up and you kind of do that high curl. I'll set that really heavy where I can't even lift it, and then I'll just ramp up and try to move it. It's not going to move at all, but I'm just activating from that lengthened position to get some extra blood flow and to affect that connective tissue a little bit more. It really will help with separation, your ability to get that 3D look. Here's an example of doing like a double isometric. I'm doing internal rotation while I'm pressing down the elbow, so I get that low lat and trap activation, really good bench press prep. Same thing, but the opposite. Now I'm activating the external rotators. And ballistic isometrics are really great for post-activation potentiation. This is implemented by Westside Barbell. It's something I have experimented with a lot myself, and I can really feel the effects. It's pretty cool. So I like to do it with a band, and all I'm doing is I'm just pressing as fast as I can, not really getting much movement, but I'm getting a little bit since I'm using a band. The traditional way I taught was doing it against a fixed object, but I think there's benefits to using that little bit of accommodating resistance. So I call it a ballistic accommodating isometric. Technically, you're moving a little bit, I guess, so it's not isometric, but it's just barely. And as soon as you lose speed, you're done. And that's supposed to help you become a lot more efficient neurally. You're going to recruit a lot more muscle fibers all at once to get a little bit stronger. Another isometric that they use at Westside a lot is an overcoming isometric. And usually I see this with like a deadlift, and a lot of times people will set it up where they're doing a deadlift in a rack, but they set the safety bars in a position to where you're gonna hit them like once you're starting to come up. So it's like I might come up and then I hit a stop where my sticking point is, and then I just pull against that bar and drop back down. So I'm only going partial reps. Those are really effective at increasing your strength, like I said, especially if you have a sticking point. And also, isometrics do help with hypertrophy. Those ballistic isometrics from length and range have been shown to really promote hypertrophy. The way I usually incorporate isometrics in my bodybuilding style workouts is I do isometrics on lateral raises a lot of times. And these are brutal, and you know, people seem to really not understand the value of isometrics. Even when I posted this, someone questioned, like, is there really a lot of purpose? Like, in the community, we've just been hounded that we only need to focus on getting that stretch range, and that's not everything. Like I said, connective tissue matters. There's more to building a body besides just adding muscle tissue. So these are absolutely horrible, and I've got great shoulders. I don't think they're hurting my shoulders by doing some isometrics at all. Another way I do them a lot is on these like bicep curls, usually from this seated position where I'm deep in the hip flexion, and I'll hold one at a time, really helping myself get a pump. I might alternate, I might do a bunch of them at once, but they really help just to get a lot of blood flow and increase the metabolic stress. Also, you know, there's always benefits to holding a little isometric at the stretched position, whether that's like a fly or whether I'm doing like a stiff leg deadlift. Sometimes I'll hold that for 2 to 4 seconds. And I do like to hold a shortened position sometimes too, whether it's a curl, usually like a leg extension. This is one where I'll do most often, where I'll hold the shortened position for 2 to 4 seconds. And again, people will say that's useless, but I keep seeing more striations, so I'm going to keep doing it. So isometrics are probably the most versatile contraction there is, and they're fun, okay? So don't overlook them. Next, we're going to look at eccentrics, which are probably the next most fun and the most versatile on the list. And let's kind of think of it the way we looked at isometrics, starting with more of like a rehab approach. So the best way to do eccentrics in this case is just to go really slow, controlled, and light, and be able to connect to everything moving independently, making sure they just start chunking movements together. So here's an example of how to do a eccentric for your back if you're having a tight back. I'm in a Zercher position with the bar, and I'm just really controlled hitting that flexion. Again, this is going to help build flexion tolerance if you don't have it. So you can have a partner help you bring it back, or you can just do like 1 rep and set it back yourself if you don't want to load the concentric portion, which is what I usually do if someone's having issues with their back. Another example, same thing, but now I'm just using a normal grip. I'm not using that Zercher style, but there are benefits to using the Zercher grip, especially for your T-spine. Here's an example against the wall, and if I'm doing this with the client, usually I will just kind of help them with the weights up, or I'll take the weights and get them back to them. If I'm doing it by myself and I was just doing the eccentric, I might just do 1 rep. You can also kind of like push your back against there and then slide up a little bit if you don't want to use the extension muscles to come up. But just doing like 1 or 2 reps of these are really good. And then when you get to the end, you can make it an isometric and just hold that in-range flexion too. So eccentrics are really good at helping you recover from injury, gaining some mobility back. They're also good at just increasing mobility overall. I really like to do this reverse Nordic. This is an eccentric where I'm really just loading down and I'm helping myself up. And these are really great at loosening up these anterior tissues, your hip flexors and your abs. I'll switch this into a one-legged variation to really get deep in there. And this is something I do every single leg day. Just focusing on the eccentric. I'm not really pushing myself up on this version because I'm just working on mobility. I just want to lengthen. So eccentrics are really low-hanging fruit, and a lot of times they can improve your mobility a lot. And you can kind of tell if you need them, like for your pecs, for example. If I feel like I'm at an in-range tension really soon, then I should do some negatives along that pathway. And you can do them fast. On here I'm doing a little bit of speed as well. And sometimes that helps if you got really sticky tissues, but it's also beneficial if you need to be able to absorb force quick for a specific sport or any other purpose like that. But doing these negatives is a really good way to just increase the mobility right before you hit whatever body part you're trying to get. And it makes a huge difference with only 2 minutes of effort. I also think these really help with your separation, getting this connective tissue to move around. Like, I have really good separation, and I didn't always. It's something that really happened over the last 6 or 7 years as I've become really focused on my mobility. So here's an example of me using the overspeed eccentric. I look angry. And then this is an eccentric, because I'm actually not at an in range. I'm almost at an in range, and I'm walking back, making this go into further external rotation while I'm resisting a little bit. So that's like a force negative. There's something that we do in FRC called a EQI, or a dynamic EQI. And these are really fun eccentrics. So what EQI stands for is a eccentric quasi-isometric. So this is different than a normal eccentric because you're trying to not let it be an eccentric, but it's just going to happen because gravity is going to win that battle. So essentially you're trying to hold an isometric. So let's say I was doing just a bicep one. So I'd be just holding that isometric elbow flexion for as long as I can, but I can change different things. I can change that shoulder position. I can change whether I'm pronated or supinated, whatever it takes to be able to hold that elbow flexion for as long as possible. So I'm going to recruit from different lines of tension, but I'm slowly going to lose it. And as I lose it, I'm trying to keep it for as long as I can. I don't want to let it completely fall fast. So these are really awesome for your connective tissue and your muscle tissue. Here's an example of me doing this for kind of my lats. I'm going for kind of shoulder extension. I'm trying to keep the elbow down as much as I can, but I'm moving away, making it harder. I'm changing different positions. So here's that bicep example I was talking about. And again, I'm just gonna play with different shoulder positions of internal, external rotation and different amounts of pronation and supination and just try to make this last as long as I can. So typically you're going for about 60 to 90 seconds when you're doing these for the connective tissue. Well, this one's really brutal, using that monkey foot, going for the knee flexion for those hamstrings. These ones really suck. It's very hard to lose this slow. You just want to give up as soon as it starts getting hard. So these dynamic EQIs are really gnarly, and they can actually give you a great pump, and they can help build a lot of muscle tissue. I get really sore doing these, especially for hamstrings. So you can also obviously use eccentrics for building muscle tissue because the eccentric portion of a lift is usually considered the most important contraction when it comes to building muscle. So something I like to do a lot is overloaded negatives, and you can do these by either like just doing normal till you get to failure, and then helping on the concentric and controlling the eccentric on your own, like here. Or you can just make it so heavy that you can't even get any concentric contractions at all, and you have to help right away, and you just do the negative on your own. So these are something I do a lot for lats. I think that's a great muscle group to apply this technique to. And with eccentrics, it's all about maximizing muscle damage. Isometrics aren't going to create that much muscle damage at all. So that's something to keep in mind with your programming too. If you're hitting a body part really frequently, maybe don't really overload the negatives. You can focus a little bit on isometrics and some things we're going to do with the concentric portions later too. You can also overload negatives on your own with pretty much any like single arm movement, and certain machines will really lend themselves to it. Like on an adductor machine, it's really easy to just kind of help yourself close your legs and then control it out on its own. A certain leg curl and leg extensions, you can kind of use the lever there to help yourself on the concentric portion. There's also certain machines and old school equipment that make the eccentric heavier and kind of match the concentric effort. So we're supposed to be like 60% stronger on the eccentric. These old Nautilus machines, and there's certain machines that make it so that as you're lowering the weight, you know, I went to an old school gym in Portland and I was doing this press, and it was like designed to be like really heavy on the way down. So I didn't get any rest, and it was really challenging. But there's some cool old machines that are really, really sought after that do that. And I think there's definitely some benefits for muscle building. I don't know if I want to do it for everything, but I would love to have a little more access to some of those machines. All right, so eccentrics are really fun, not quite as fun as isometrics to me, but they're better at promoting hypertrophy. They can still have a lot of connective tissue benefits as well, and they can increase your mobility. All right, so finally we're in the concentric contractions. Concentrics, they're not that exciting, but there is maybe a little more to them than meets the eye. So one thing I think a lot of people overlook on concentrics is they're not really creating a lot of muscle damage either. It's the eccentric contraction that creates the muscle damage. So like I said earlier, if we are prioritizing a body part and we're hitting it 3 times a week, we only have like a day of rest on one of those days, maybe we can do a little bit of a concentric and isometric focus without really going crazy on the negative. So a good way to do that is something that I first heard of from Dr. Squat, the original PhD, the best PhD in the fitness industry. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, Frederick Hatfield. And he had a book that was basically my bodybuilding Bible, and it's called Hardcore Bodybuilding, A Scientific Approach. Really cool, really interesting. He talked about the ABC setup. Basically, every single body part had 3 different workouts, and it was different levels of intensity and different amounts of volume. And on one of those days, it was kind of like a recovery workout, and on that, he had a concentric only focus. So ideally, you have a partner that can like help you do the eccentric portions, and you just do the concentric. So really easy example, if I'm doing a bench press, they help you lower it, you lift it up on your own. So preferably you have a partner for this type of workout, but there are certain machines that lend themselves to being able to do this, like certain leg extensions and leg curls. You can use the lever to help yourself on the eccentric, and you just control the concentric. Obviously, a lot of single arm stuff, you can do this on yourself. Sometimes certain chest press machines have like the footrest where you can stop it and kind of push it off in the beginning, so you don't have to do the full range on your own. You can stop it as you're getting deeper into the stretch, which would be the most important part. Using the sled is a great example of concentric only contractions. So if you're trying to grow your quads and you're hitting them pretty frequently, this is a good way to get some pump in there and without creating that much muscle damage. The sled is a great tool for concentric only contractions. You could do that, and you could do like a stair climber, and that's going to get a good pump without a lot of eccentric load on there. When it comes to concentric contractions, usually you hear pretty explosive, but you can go like really fast to go for speed at a little bit lighter weight. This is what they do at Westside and a lot of powerlifters. You need to not only have strength, you need to have explosive speed to actually have power. So a lot of times you'll see these guys put bands on a bar, and they're just going for max speed on the press, on the squat, on the dead, and that's to get them better at recruiting muscle fibers all at once. So over speed concentrics are really good for neural adaptions. But I also like to do slow concentrics, and people don't like this either. I hear a lot of people say you shouldn't do this, but I love them, especially for quads and especially for back. I think they can really help you connect to certain back muscles that otherwise you might have trouble to. I love doing them on things like these pull-ups. And technically I'm doing a little bit of a eccentric too, but I'm staying more concentric, and I'm going real slow. And slow eccentrics aren't that uncommon, but slow concentrics are something I don't really ever see often. So I do them on things like these, on the pull-ups, on certain back moves. I do them on hack squat, and they are terrible. Something I also do sometimes is in-range contractions, and this is something we do in FRC. We don't really do in the bodybuilding world too much, but it can really help get comfortable with your in-range capabilities, which I think is pretty overlooked. So here I'm just doing in-range hip extension, barely coming off. I'm right at my in-range capacity, and I'm just getting as high as I can and holding that for about 15 seconds. Same thing over here. I'm working my in-range external rotation. And again, there are benefits to this because as I get stronger at my in-range, my middle range actually is going to get a little more neurally efficient as well. It's always a good thing to have more capsular awareness. I've also seen some really cool machines that do like eccentric overload only or concentric only even. And one time I saw these really cool machines. It was in my hometown of Conroe, Texas. I've never been able to find them again. I've been looking. I'm really intrigued by them. They were like hydraulic, and they were set so every contraction was concentric. I'd never seen that. So they had like a hammer curl set up. Jesus Christ, look like I'm double fisting cocks. Sorry. I make fun of Mike for the gay humor, and here I am. So they have, I'm going to turn this way. It doesn't look as bad. I'm going to lower this. So they have these like hammer position handles, and you go into triceps and biceps, and it's concentric triceps, concentric biceps. They also had a chest press row, same thing, concentric. They had a pull down press, and they even had like a leg curl leg extension setup. So really interesting. You know, I know the eccentric portion is an important part, but I do wonder what the benefits are to having that, and I would love to play with it. Let me know if you guys have ever seen that machine or anything cool like that. So in conclusion, I think isometrics are probably the most underutilized contraction in bodybuilding. especially because they're just so versatile. They can increase your joint range of motion. They can increase, more global ranges of motion. They can increase your connective tissue architecture, the connective tissue load-bearing capacity, and they can increase hypertrophy as well. Eccentric overload's great for muscle tissue, and slow controlled eccentrics on a muscle that's tight is really easy. It's really low-hanging fruit that can make pretty big changes in your mobility. And concentrics, can't get too fancy with those. I do think that kind of focusing on concentric only and taking away the eccentric is kind of interesting if it's a really frequently hit body part. And I also think going really slow on the concentrics can have some benefits, especially with your mind-muscle connection. Not something I would do all the time, but it's cool to throw it in there every now and then. So hopefully you guys were able to get something out of this. Hopefully you enjoyed this, Kenan. I appreciate your support again. If you guys have any requests, anything you think is worth making a video on, let me know. Drop it in the comments. All right, thanks.